"We forgot your ticket. You're not coming with us." That's what my parents told me at JFK Airport after I had spent months planning the trip of a lifetime. Imagine standing there with your suitcase in hand, watching your whole family walk away toward security, while you're left frozen under the harsh fluorescent lights. That was the moment my heart cracked, not because of the money, but because it proved what I had feared all along. I was never really part of them. Before I take you deeper into this story, let me pause for just a second. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, hit that subscribe button. And while you're here, drop your city and the time you're watching this in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel and how they connect us across the world. Back to that morning. I had paid $36,000 to cover everything: business class flights, luxury hotels, private tours. I told myself it was worth it. Finally, a chance to build real memories with the people who raised me. My mother even hugged me when I showed her the itinerary, whispering, "You're such a blessing." For a moment, I believed her. But at the check-in counter, my parents pulled me aside. My father wouldn't even look me in the eye as my mother said those words, "We forgot your ticket." Just like that, they turned away, boarding passes in hand, their laughter echoing down the line. No one offered to stay behind. No one even suggested buying another seat. They simply left. The Uber ride home was the longest 40 minutes of my life. My phone buzzed with pictures from the departure gate, champagne glasses, smiling faces, captions about family adventure. Not one message asking if I was okay. I sat there staring at the screen, realizing I had spent years trying to buy my way into a family that never wanted me. Paying off their debts, covering my sister's tuition, even buying my mother a new car. And yet, at the one moment that mattered, they left me behind. I didn't know it then, but being abandoned that morning wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of everything. The silence in my apartment that night was deafening. $36,000 gone, and with it, the illusion that love could be purchased. I scrolled through the family chat, their photos from Rome filling the screen. Gelato by the Trevi Fountain, wine glasses raised in Tuscany. Not one mention of me. Not even a casual, "wish you were here." For the first time in my life, I didn't cry. I just sat there staring at the glow of my phone, realizing that my parents had made a choice, and choices speak louder than words. 3 days later, I buried myself in work at the financial firm where I served as CFO. Numbers never lied. People did. As I reviewed some documents connected to my family's property development project, a $50 million tower they plan to unveil soon, I noticed something off. Missing funds, irregular signatures, shell companies that shouldn't exist. My hands shook as I traced the evidence. It wasn't just negligence, it was theft. That's when my phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Miss Parker?" "This is Alexander Reed. We met briefly last year at the Hartman Conference. I'd like to discuss an investment opportunity with you." We agreed to meet at the St. Regis the following afternoon. I almost canceled, but something in his voice, steady, certain, pulled me in. Sitting across from him in the velvet-lined cafe, I watched as he slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents confirming what I had suspected. The embezzlement wasn't random. It was my own sister, Sophia, funneling nearly $2 million out of the project. That was my turning point. "They didn't just leave you at the airport," Alexander said quietly. "They've been stealing from you for years. Without your investment, they collapse." His words cut deeper than anything my parents had ever said. It wasn't about a forgotten ticket anymore. It was about betrayal, layer upon layer of it. The transition from heartbreak to resolve wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, steady, almost surgical. For the first time I saw my situation clearly. My parents and sister had written me out of their hearts long ago. Now I had to decide whether I'd let them write me out of my future. Alexander leaned back, studying me. "You have 2 options," he continued. "Let them burn and lose everything with them, or step in, partner with us, and take control." I looked down at the papers again, at the proof of Sophia's fraud. at the clauses I myself had drafted when structuring the deal. A small smile tugged at the corner of my mouth as the realization hit me. The family that left me stranded at the airport had no idea they'd already handed me the keys to their empire. That night, as the city lights flickered beyond my window, I whispered to myself, I was never meant to be their passenger. I was meant to be the pilot. And just like that, the course of my life shifted. The weeks that followed felt like walking through fog. My parents and sister were still posting their sunlit European selfies, while I quietly prepared for something far darker. At the office, I spent nights combing through contracts, tracing every wire transfer Sophia had manipulated. Each forged signature, each fake vendor invoice pulled me further away from the girl who once begged for a place at their table and closer to the woman who was about to take everything back. Alexander Reed checked in daily. He was calm, methodical, almost unnervingly confident. One evening he leaned across his desk, Manhattan's skyline glowing behind him. "They don't see you coming, Elena," he said. "That's the beauty of it. You're invisible to them, until you're not." His words stayed with me. Invisible. That was exactly what I had been all my life. Invisible at graduations, at birthdays, even in family photos where I was always the one behind the camera. But invisibility could be a weapon if used at the right time. The invitation to the tower's launch arrived in my inbox 2 weeks later. My parents hadn't sent it directly. It came from their PR firm. I almost laughed. After leaving me stranded at JFK, they still expected me to show up and clap politely while they unveiled their empire, but Alexander had other plans. "You won't be going as their daughter," he told me. "You'll be going as my partner." My strategic advisor, I hesitated. Showing up meant stepping into the fire. But then I remembered the sting of my mother's voice at the airport. "We forgot your ticket." That was no accident. That was erasure, and I was done being erased. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and polished marble on the night of the launch. 200 investors sipped champagne, blissfully unaware they were minutes from witnessing the Parker family's undoing. I arrived at Alexander's side, wearing the black dress my mother once said was too much for family events. Tonight, it was perfect. The moment Margaret Parker spotted me, her smile faltered. Sophia whispered frantically into her ear, eyes wide, but the show had to go on. My mother stepped to the podium, her voice echoing through the grand hall. "The Parker family has always stood for integrity, tradition, and exclusivity," she declared. I nearly laughed. Integrity, from the same woman who had walked past me at the airport without a backward glance. Sophia took the microphone next. That was the moment everything shifted. "Before we continue," she announced, her eyes flashing toward me, "I want to address the presence of someone in this room. Elena Parker may use our name, but she is not our blood. She has no claim to this legacy. She is not family." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Security moved toward me. And that's when the turning point arrived. Not from me, but from Alexander. "Actually," his deep voice rang out steady and commanding, "she's with me." The guards froze. Every investor in that room knew Alexander Reed. "You didn't touch his guests." My parents' faces drained of color. My mother tried to recover. "Mr. Reed, this is highly irregular." Alexander cut her off. "What's irregular is the $20 million gap in your funding, or the $2 million in fraudulent vendor payments signed by your daughter Sophia." The room erupted in whispers, phones lifted to record. I rose from my seat, my voice calm but slicing through the chaos. "You called me a leech," I said, eyes locked on Sophia. "But who paid your tuition? Who covered the mortgage? Who invested $5 million of her own money into this very project while you were stealing from it?" She tried to shout me down, but I connected my phone to the ballroom's massive screens. One click and every forged signature, every shell company, every transfer appeared for all to see. My mother staggered, clutching the podium. "Turn it off!" she screamed. I didn't flinch. "No," I replied. "For once, everyone gets to see the truth." That night, the girl left behind at the airport ceased to exist. In her place stood the woman who finally understood that being invisible had been my power all along. They thought I wasn't family. They were right. I wasn't theirs. But the empire they tried to build on my back, every brick of it, was about to become mine. The ballroom was no longer a celebration. It was a trial. Investors crowded forward with phones raised, whispers ricocheting off the chandeliers. My mother, Margaret, stood frozen at the podium, her smile shattered. My sister Sophia's voice cracked as she screamed over the noise. "She's nobody!" Just a charity case we took in. I didn't shout back. Instead, I let the silence stretch until every eye turned to me. And then I said it. A charity case who paid off your mortgage, who covered your loans, who invested $5 million into this project. Tell me, Sophia, who's been carrying who? The air thickened. You could feel the crowd shift, the weight of truth pressing down. Alexander Reed stepped onto the stage with deliberate calm, holding a leather folder. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "Sterling Global has secured every outstanding debt connected to the Parker Tower. Effective this morning, control of the project rests with us." My mother gasped. "You can't, this is our legacy." Alexander looked straight at her. "Legacies are built on integrity, and integrity is what your family has lost." He handed me the folder. Inside was the clause I had drafted 2 years earlier. My failsafe. Section 47B. The words leapt from the page. In the event of fiduciary misconduct, shares transfer automatically to the largest individual investor. That investor was me. I looked up, meeting Sophia's eyes. Her face had gone ghostly white. She whispered, "No, this isn't possible." "It's not only possible," I replied steadily, "it's already done." The shift was instant. The investors who had dismissed me minutes earlier leaned in with respect. The guards who had moved to remove me now stepped back, waiting for my command. And my parents, the people who once told me love didn't pay bills, stood powerless, their empire unraveling in front of 200 witnesses. The signing was brutal in its efficiency. Alexander's legal team laid out the transfer documents on the podium itself. Margaret's hand shook so hard she could barely hold the pen. Sophia cried openly, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "What happens if we don't sign?" she asked weakly. The lawyer didn't blink. "Then we file criminal charges for embezzlement. $2 million is grand larceny. That's up to 15 years in prison." The room was so quiet you could hear the scratch of Margaret's signature against the paper. Sophia followed, each stroke of ink cutting away their last claim to power. With every line, I felt the weight on my shoulders lift. Not just years of financial burden, but decades of emotional chains. When the final signature was done, Alexander handed me the microphone. "Ms. Parker," he said, "your investors would like to hear from you." My heart raced, but my voice came out steady. "Good evening. Tonight I stand here not as the outsider my family painted me to be, but as the majority owner of this project. For years I poured my savings, my energy, and my love into people who only saw me as a wallet. They told me I wasn't real family. They told me I didn't belong. And tonight, they proved themselves right. I don't belong to them. I never did. But this," I swept my hand across the crowded room, "this belongs to me." The ballroom erupted in applause. Investors surged forward, some clapping, some recording, others shaking their heads in awe. Margaret tried one last time. She stumbled toward me, her voice breaking. "Elena, please, we're family." I met her eyes. "No, family is a choice. And you made yours at JFK Airport. Security approached Sophia with a small cardboard box, her office belongings already packed. She shrieked, "You planned this all along!" I shook my head. "No, you planned this when you hid my passport, when you canceled my ticket and left me behind. That was your plan. This—" I held up the contract. "This is my answer." The investors cheered louder. Reporters pushed forward with microphones, shouting questions about the scandal, about Sterling Global's partnership, about me. But all I could see was my mother's trembling figure and my sister's tear-streaked face. The saddest part wasn't their downfall. It was the simple truth I spoke next. I would have given you everything. All I ever wanted was to belong. But you chose greed, you chose cruelty, and now you live with that choice. That night, I didn't just win control of a tower, I won back myself. The girl they left behind at the airport had grown into a woman who no longer begged for love at a table that was never hers. I walked off the stage with Alexander at my side, the cameras flashing, the applause thundering. Behind me, the Parker family crumbled into obscurity. Ahead of me, the city lights of Manhattan glittered with possibility. And for the first time, I realized I didn't need their ticket. I had already built my own way forward. The fallout was swift and merciless. By the next morning, headlines screamed across every major outlet. Adopted daughter ousts Parker family in shocking takeover. Investors couldn't get enough of the story, some praising me as a genius, others calling it the ultimate revenge. For the first time in my life, the world saw me not as a shadow in the background, but as the woman in control. Margaret and Sophia weren't so fortunate. Within 48 hours, the FBI froze Sophia's accounts. Investigators uncovered she had been siphoning money long before the tower project. What began as whispers of scandal became criminal charges: embezzlement, fraud, falsifying records. The job offers she had boasted about disappeared overnight. One recruiter even told a reporter, "She's radioactive." Margaret's fall was quieter but no less brutal. The charity boards she sat on demanded her resignation. The country club revoked her membership. The women who once lunched with her 3 times a week suddenly stopped returning her calls. She went from chauffeured luxury to standing at bus stops in the rain, clutching a worn handbag. But the real turning point for me came not in a courtroom or a boardroom, but in my office 2 weeks later. I signed a transfer document redirecting the $5 million I had invested in the Parker Tower to a new initiative, the Foster Futures Fund, a scholarship program for children aging out of foster care. As I signed, I whispered to myself, "This money will never be wasted on people who don't value me again. It will go to kids who know what it means to be forgotten." That act changed everything. Suddenly, I wasn't just the woman who brought down a dynasty. I was the woman who built something better in its place. Messages poured in from foster kids, from adoptees, from strangers who had felt invisible in their own families. One comment read, "You gave me hope tonight. Maybe being left behind isn't the end. It's the start of our own story." Looking back now, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if my parents had simply bought me that ticket. If I had boarded the plane with them, smiling for photos in front of the Coliseum, would I still be their silent provider, funding a family that never truly saw me? The truth is, being left behind was the greatest gift they ever gave me. It forced me to see my own worth, something I had buried under years of trying to earn love with money. I've learned 3 lessons I carry with me every day. First, when people show you who they are, believe them the first time. My parents had spent years showing me I was just a wallet with a pulse. I just refused to accept it. Second, you can't buy belonging. I poured thousands into their lives and got only silence in return. And third, the most important, real family isn't about blood. It's about choice, respect, and love, freely given. That's why I built the Foster Futures Fund. Because I know what it feels like to sit in the shadows, wondering if you'll ever be enough. And I want every child who feels forgotten to know, you are more than enough. So if you're watching this right now, and you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, hear me when I say, you belong. Not because they finally decide you do, but because you choose yourself. If this story touched you, subscribe for more stories like mine, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and have you ever had to walk away from people who never valued you? Your story might be the very thing someone else needs to find their strength, because sometimes the ticket they forget to buy is the freedom you didn't know you needed.